Hey, everybody, and welcome back to a kind of a different edition of the All Aboard newsletter. And so, because it's a holiday week, because it's a little bit slow, I've been busy, and I imagine you've been busy too. So, I wanted to do something a little bit different this week. And what I decided to do was to kind of reflect a little bit on all of the books that I read in 2024. And so, this is one of my favorite weeks of the year between Christmas and New Year's because it's super slow, not a lot of business is getting done, and it gives us time to kind of slow down and reflect. And so as I've gone through the year, I hit my goal this year of reading 24 books. Some of that was read by a physical book. Some of that was an audio book. Some of that was read on a Kindle. And so one of the things I wanted to do here is just kind of reflect a little bit and share the 5 best books that I read in 2024 that I think that you would get value out of as well. And so as a way to not belabor the point, I'll just get into it. So the first book that I would recommend from 2024 is this book called Mentors by Russell Brand. And so Russell Brand is a comedian. He's been in a bunch of movies, iconic films, similar to like Get Him to the Greek, Forgetting Sarah Marshall. And, unsurprisingly, this guy, has substance abuse problems. He had prescription pill problems. He had alcoholism, sex addiction, all types of different things. And reading through this book, Mentors, really what he's doing is he's stopping and talking about all of the people who have helped him on the way into getting sober. And the thing to remember here is that this is narrated ultimately by him. It's written by him. It's semi-autobiographical. And he's basically saying, this is my life. This is me getting sober. And when you read it on the surface, basically it's getting inside the mind of somebody who's done tremendous amounts of work on themselves. And whether or not it's complete bullshit or it's true, right? He is a self-admitted narcissist. So it could be his perception of the world and the narrative he's giving us. Or it could be actual truth. It doesn't really matter because the message is clear. It talks a lot about the types of people who helped him along the way, the types of mentors you can have. And it really resonated with me a lot because, I coach a dozen or so agents across the country trying to help them, right? I have a coach almost at all times. I just swapped out coaches, hired a new coach to basically help me learn more about building out the telemarketing part of Next Call Club on how I get that to be 3, 4, 5 times the size of what it is today. And so I really loved that book because he talks about mentors in all types of shapes and sizes, not always the ones that you would typically expect. So that's book number 1. And that feeds into book number 2, which kind of stays in the same vein. And this is called The Coaching Habit. This is by Michael Bungay Stanier. I'll put the links to this in the bottom, but this is an extremely quick read. I read this book after reading Mentors, and, I wanted to say to myself, I've done a lot of work on getting better at being a leader or a coach this year. And so I've had a lot of experience as a manager, a lot of experience as a leader. But, in the last year or two, I've started consulting more and more people from outside of my organization. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to read this. And I actually invited some of our junior managers at Peachy Insurance to read this with us. And some of the people at Next Call Club as well. And what I really loved about this book is, first off, it's short. And you can probably read the entire thing in an afternoon if you want to. If you're more of an audiobook person, I believe it's on Spotify. If you have premium and you get 15 hours a month of audiobooks through Spotify Premium, I believe it's like a 3.5-hour listen. Basically, the entire premise of this book is how to stop talking and stop telling people what to do, stop giving advice, and instead start asking questions, start asking insightful, thoughtful questions to help them come up with the answer themselves, but also to really get to the core issue at hand. I can't tell you how many times personally I've been upset, and I think it's, this surface level thing. I said, well, I'm upset about this, or I'm upset about that. And the more I talk through it, the more I realize there's a root cause kind of deep below the surface that I wasn't even able to identify, right? So the coaching habit is all about trying to talk to people that you're working with to help identify the problem and solve it faster. So 2 books on coaching, both are extremely short. There's a theme here. I read some books that were 1,000+ pages this year, mostly fiction when they're that long. I read a lot of biography. Those are usually between, 700 and 1,000 pages as well. You won't find those on this short list because while they were very good, they weren't the best of the year. Okay. So here is number 3. And this is another extremely short read. It is called Excellent Advice for Living by Kevin Kelly. Kevin Kelly is one of my favorite writers, and he's not really known as a prominent author of writing books, but he has been writing online seemingly since the dawn of the internet. And he has this amazing article called 1,000 True Fans that I read a couple of years ago when I started, putting myself out there as a speaker, as a newsletter writer, as a coach for other agents. And I loved it. And so when I found out he had this book called Excellent Advice for Living, I had to buy it. And that when you think through this, it's really just a collected work of his thoughts and ideas and advice. And you can read this again in an afternoon. And I think one of my biggest takeaways from this book, there was really two. And one of them said, a lot of people talk bad about others in private. Be the person who says good things about others in private. And I've really tried to live up to that this year. I said, how can I go out of my way to build other people up in private conversations where they may not even know it's ever going to happen, right? So how do I flip that on its head? Instead of focusing on the negative, always focus on the positive and say, wow, this person is amazing. I have nothing bad to say about them. They're so full of integrity and they're so good, or they're so smart, or whatever. I love that. The other thing that I really, really liked was there was, and I thought it was prescient as we were going into the election year this year, was if somebody can basically identify your opinions based on your other opinions, right? So if you say, look, if you believe that cattle shouldn't be taxed, right? Like, I'm just using crazy examples here. If you believe cattle shouldn't be taxed, and they can use that basically opinion of yours to guess your other opinions and guess it correctly, it might be a good sign that you're in an ideologue, right? You're stuck in an ideology where you're not thinking for yourself, and maybe you're really just listening to what other people say, right? So it's a reminder to try and be an independent thinker. Try to go against the grain. It's okay to agree with the masses, but have a conversation with yourself and say, do I really agree with this? Or am I just kind of falling in line because, this person that I know and respect said it? And so always think for yourself. Loved this book, Excellent Advice for Living by Kevin Kelly. Okay. The fourth one is one that I picked up when I was in Italy. So I went to Italy for a couple weeks this year, was traveling all over the country, and I basically finished my book. So I needed a new book. And when I was in the bookstore, they had a small English section, and I saw Machiavelli's The Prince. And I've heard people talk about Machiavelli's The Prince for years and years and years and years. And I said, you know what? That's a cool looking cover. I've never seen a cover that looks like this. I loved the aesthetic. I loved the way it feels. And it's pocket size. So I really, really liked that. And as I started to read through it, I couldn't believe how readable it was for something that was written, 400 or 500 years ago. And basically the idea here is that this was a handbook written by Machiavelli, given to a monarch in basically medieval Italy. And it was basically saying, hey, here's how you basically attain, hold on to, and enhance your power. And so in this idea, he's talking to a prince or a monarch, right? But I think we can use this as a leader. And I think a lot of times people think about Machiavelli as manipulative, right? Like, oh man, it's Machiavellian, it's manipulative. And it's not really the truth. It's a book about human nature from hundreds of years ago that still holds up today. And, you've probably heard the saying, is it better to be loved or feared? And, people always kind of stop there. Well, that's Machiavelli. And basically what he says is, it's good to be both loved and feared, so long as you are not hated, right? So you ask this question, should I be loved or feared? Machiavelli says you should be both. Just make sure you're not cruel and hated, because if you're hated, people kind of rebel, people won't follow you. That's just kind of like the most common thing that people hear, but a great book. I read it over the course of a week or two, stopped, pondered on things a bunch of times. We'll certainly reread this. But again, this is the fourth book on this list. There's only one more, and every single one of these has been under 200 pages. So 4 books. Okay. Last book. And this is, I think, a little bit of a combo breaker, right? The first 2 or 3 you could call were self-improvement. Machiavelli's The Prince, maybe you could call it light philosophy or almost like politics. But this last one is my favorite genre, and it's narrative nonfiction. And basically what that means is it's basically a book about history written in a narrative fashion. So it reads like a novel. Okay. And so this is going to be American Kingpin. American Kingpin is one of the best books I've ever read in my entire life. I've recommended it to a number of people this year. I bought it for a number of people this year, and every single person who I recommended it to and read it said, oh my God, that book was amazing. I could not put it down. And one of the things I love about this most is that the chapters are only 3 or 4 pages. And so, little pro tip for you: if you ever have a hard time sticking with a book or getting kind of on track with your reading habit, pick a book with short chapters because you feel like you're making a lot of momentum. Okay, but what American Kingpin is ultimately about is it's about the guy who founded the Silk Road, which was a place where you could buy things online using Bitcoin, basically, in an anonymous way. And it started out as a way to buy drugs, and eventually it turned into guns and human trafficking and hits for hire and all types of things. And it is a story about ambition and ego and, starting to feel like you're the ruler of the world and watching it as it all comes crashing down. So it's a story about people who do some incredibly amazing things from an intellectual standpoint, but also shows you how great our law enforcement is in the United States of America. So those are my 5 books. I highly recommend all 5 of those. I'd love to hear what your favorite book was in 2024. I read 24 books this year. That's probably the most I've ever read in a year. And I did that by varying, kind of like the type of book that I read, whether that was an audiobook, whether that was a physical book, or whether that was on a Kindle. So anyways, would love to hear what your favorite book of the year was. I hope you have a wonderful new year. I hope you had an amazing holiday season. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the new year.